Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a deeply tragic, highly complex legal case that really highlights the terrifying gap that can exist between a carefully curated public persona and a horrifying private reality. We're going to meticulously break down a newly released court filing from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. It details the severe allegations surrounding the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. We'll walk through the timeline, the exact evidence prosecutors claim to have, and where the defendant currently stands legally. It's a heavy subject for sure, but understanding the structure of these legal arguments is absolutely crucial.
Right off the bat, the entire foundation of the prosecution's case is built on a chilling premise. According to the district attorney's filing, and I quote, "Knowing he had to silence the victim before she ruined his music career, defendant stabbed the victim to death multiple times and stood by while she bled out." So the state isn't framing this as a random act of violence. They are arguing it was a highly calculated decision driven by one specific motive: protecting a highly lucrative music career.
To really grasp what's happening here, you have to consider the staggering power dynamic at play. In one world, you have David Anthony Burke. You probably know him professionally as D4V. At the time, he was an 18-year-old rising indie pop star. We're talking about a massive, global phenomenon who exploded from making music for YouTube videos to dominating TikTok and Spotify, with his breakthrough 2022 song racking up over 1 billion plays. But in a totally hidden reality, you have Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who prosecutors say was just a 13-year-old child when the alleged abuse began. It's a massive, jarring disparity between a public figure on a meteoric rise to fame and the private, shielded existence of a very young teenager.
So how did this all start? Well, the prosecution traces their first contact all the way back to when Rivas Hernandez was just 11 years old. By the time she was 13, the filing claims the sexual abuse began, and Burke was 18 at that point. This timeline marches us straight toward a critical juncture in February of 2024. That's when this situation finally intersects with law enforcement, because Rivas Hernandez's parents officially report her missing from their home in Lake Elsinore.
Okay, so February 2024 hits, and law enforcement gets involved. When Riverside County Sheriff's detectives actually contact Burke, the document states he told them he had only met her once and completely denied knowing she was a minor. Rivas Hernandez did return home after that, and her parents, naturally trying to protect her, confiscated her cell phone. But here is where prosecutors allege Burke took deliberate steps to subvert them. They claim he drove 80 miles to her hometown and paid a friend of hers $1,000 to supply her with a secret phone just so they could keep communicating.
And that secret communication, it leads straight into a phase of massive escalation. In April of 2024, literally just 2 months after the first incident, she is reported missing a second time. Throughout the rest of that year, prosecutors state she spent a lot of her time at Burke's home in the Hollywood Hills and traveled extensively with him. We're talking trips to Las Vegas, London, and even Texas to meet his family. But the breaking point comes in April of 2025. Prosecutors say they recovered text messages revealing severe strain in the relationship, showing the victim's jealousy over Burke's relationships with other women, especially after he had allegedly led her to believe they had a real future together.
And those specific messages are what prosecutors are pointing to as the direct motive. They state in the filing that she became extremely upset and threatened to disclose damaging information about her relationship with defendant to end his career and destroy his life. Basically, the state is arguing that the looming threat of public exposure, the threat to his billions of streams, his sold-out tours, his entire rising empire, is exactly what precipitated the tragic events that followed.
Now, the timeline prosecutors lay out for the days immediately following those texts is just incredibly unsettling. On April 23, 2025, the victim's phone activity abruptly and permanently stops. Prosecutors believe this is the exact day she was murdered. The very next day, and straight into the 25th, Burke is out there actively giving radio interviews to promote his debut full-length album, Withered, which dropped that next day. It's a literal split screen. A horrific private crime on one side and a massive public celebration of his music on the other. This juxtaposition is central to the narrative the state is building.
So what supposedly happened next? Well, the state alleges a highly calculated cover-up. According to their evidence, Burke purchased 2 chainsaws online. The court document claims he then used an inflatable pool inside his garage to dismember her body, and keep in mind, this is a location where the victim's DNA was subsequently discovered. Finally, he allegedly drove about 110 miles northwest of his home to Lake Cachuma to dispose of evidence. Notably, the victim's passport was actually found at that lake months later. It wasn't until September of 2025 that the tragic discovery was made. Her body was found heavily degraded inside a Tesla that had been towed from the Hollywood Hills. Because of the decomposition and severe mutilation, the autopsy noted she was missing parts of her arms, legs, and 2 fingers. Examiners had to rely on very specific markers for identification. She was ultimately identified by her braces and specific tattoos, including one on her finger that read, "Shh," and another tattoo of Burke's actual name. And again, highlighting the stark contrast in this whole case. When the body was discovered and his name became publicly attached to the investigation, Burke was literally out on a promotional music tour.
Now, it is absolutely crucial that we look at the other side and remember where the legal proceedings stand today. The defense has a very firm position. David Burke has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His legal team has publicly stated that he is completely innocent and did not cause Rivas Fernandez's death. Now, his attorneys did ask a judge to seal the prosecution's document, a request that was declined, but they haven't yet publicly provided their own detailed alternative version of events. But their stance in the court of law is crystal clear, a declaration of total innocence.
So, where does that leave the case right now? Burke was officially arrested on April 16, 2026, which was about 7 months after the body was discovered. He's facing incredibly severe charges: first-degree murder, lewd and lascivious acts with a person under 14, and mutilating a dead body. And because of the extreme nature of these charges, Burke is actually eligible for the death penalty in the state of California, though prosecutors have noted that no final decision has been made yet on whether they'll actually seek it.
All right. So with the intense allegations laid out by the state on one hand and a firm not guilty plea from the defense on the other, we have to ask, what are the next steps here? How does a case with this much gravity actually move forward through the justice system? While the immediate next step is slated for May 26, 2026, that is when the preliminary evidentiary hearing will begin. Everything we've discussed today in this explainer, the text messages, the timelines, the DNA evidence in the garage, this is what the prosecutors plan to formally present. A Superior Court judge will review all of this just to determine whether there's sufficient probable cause to take this case to a full-blown trial. Essentially, this hearing is the first major legal test of the state's allegations against the defense's assertion of complete innocence.
Which really leaves us with one massive question to chew on. As this case heads to court, how will the justice system actually weigh the massive, carefully curated digital footprint of a pop star against the silenced, recovered texts of a 14-year-old? We're looking at a trial that's going to rely heavily on digital forensics, from streaming milestones and online chainsaw purchases right down to deleted messages and secret cell phones. It is a deeply tragic intersection of public fame and private reality, and those upcoming hearings are undoubtedly going to shed a lot more light on exactly what happened. Thanks for joining me for today's explainer as we follow this developing story.